The year is 1347. A fleet of 12 ships pulls into the port of Messina, Sicily. The sailors on board are already dying. Black boils the size of eggs cover their bodies, oozing blood and pus. Some are delirious, some are already dead, slumped over the oars. The port authorities are horrified. They order the ships back out to the sea immediately, but it was already too late. What those ships carried wasn't just cargo, it was the most devastating pandemic in human history. A disease so catastrophic, it would kill between 75 and 20 million people across Eurasia in just 7 years, wiping out between 30 and 60% of Europe's entire population. This is the history of the Black Death, and some of what you think you know about it is wrong. To understand how bad it was, you have to understand what medieval Europe looked like before its arrival. Cities were dense, dirty, and completely unprepared. Streets were shared with livestock, waste ran in open gutters. Nobody understood germ theory. Nobody understood infection. If you got sick, you prayed. The disease came in 3 forms. The most common, bubonic plague, named for the buboes, horrific, swollen lymph nodes appearing in the groin, armpit, and neck. Without treatment, it killed between 30 and 75% of those infected within days. Then there was the septicemic plague. When the infection entered the bloodstream directly, skin would turn black from internal bleeding. That's likely where the name Black Death comes from. Death could come within hours. And then, worst, pneumonic plague. Airborne, spread through a cough, a breath, a whisper, nearly 100% fatal. No buboes, just fever, coughing up blood, and death within 24 to 48 hours. There was no cure. There was no treatment. There was barely even an understanding of what was happening. The plague didn't start in Europe. It started in Central Asia. Likely in the 1340s, modern DNA analysis points to a region near what is now Kyrgyzstan. From then, it traveled west along the Silk Road, the ancient trade network connecting Asia to Europe. It moved with merchants, with soldiers, with rats. The bacterium responsible, Yersinia pestis, lived in fleas that lived on rats, and rats were everywhere. By 1346, it had reached the Black Sea. By 1347, it was in Constantinople. By 1348, it had swept through France, Spain, Italy, and England. By 1350, it had reached Scandinavia. Nothing could stop it. Nothing even slowed it down. The death toll is almost impossible to comprehend. In some cities, half the population was dead within months. In others, entire streets went silent. Bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. Mass graves were dug outside city walls. Florence lost between a third and half of its population in a single year. Paris lost around 800 people a day at its peak. Some villages in rural England were wiped out entirely, their names surviving only as archaeological sites today. Silent fields where communities once stood. The smell of death was everywhere. The sound of church bells ringing for the death became so constant that authorities eventually banned them because the ringing was driving the living insane. But here's what most history videos never tell you. Europe wasn't the only place devastated. The Islamic world was hit just as hard. Cairo, at the time of one of the largest, the Islamic world was hit just as hard. Cairo, at the time one of the largest and most advanced cities on Earth, lost an estimated 200,000 people. Contemporary artists describe bodies laying in the streets faster than they could be collected. The great scholar Ibn Battuta traveled through the Middle East at the time, wrote that the dead were so numerous in some cities that the living had just stopped counting. In some regions of the Middle East, entire trade networks collapsed overnight. Cities that had been centers of learning, commerce, and culture for centuries went quiet. The Islamic world had its own plague doctors, its own theories, its own grief. The difference is that the Islamic scholars at the time were more advanced in medicine than their European counterparts, and even they were completely powerless. This wasn't a European disaster, it was a human one. And into all of this walked the plague doctors. Hired by cities to treat the sick, these figures became one of the most iconic images of the medieval world. The long black coat, the wide-brimmed hat, and that mask, the long bird-like beak stuffed with herbs and flowers designed to filter what they believed was poisoned air. They were wrong about the cause, but they showed up anyways. Most plague doctors were not experienced physicians. The real doctors had fled. These were often young, inexperienced, sometimes unqualified men paid to walk into homes where everyone was dying. Their survival rate was not good, but they kept records. They documented symptoms. They attempted treatments. Bloodletting, lancing the buboes, herbal remedies, none of it worked. But the documentation left behind is part of how we understand the plague today. For the people living through it, there was no scientific explanation. There was only God. Many believed the plague was divine punishment, God's wrath unleashed on a sinful world. Religious, flagellant movements swept across Europe, groups of people publicly whipping themselves as penance, hoping to appease an angry God. Others blamed outsiders. Jewish communities across Europe were massacred, accused of poisoning wells. It was one of the worst outbreaks of anti-Semitic violence in history. Thousands killed in pogroms across Germany, France, and Spain. Fear does ugly things to people. It always has. Now, let's talk about what you were taught that isn't actually true. Most people believe that the Black Death was purely a rat and flea situation. Rats carried fleas, fleas bit humans, done. But modern research has complicated that picture significantly. A 2018 study from the University of Oslo modeled the spread of the plague and found that in many European cities, the disease spread far too fast for it to be explained by rats and fleas alone. Human fleas and body lice, which were extremely common in medieval Europe, were likely a major transmission vector, meaning it wasn't just rats, it was the fleas living on people themselves. Then, there's the nursery rhyme. Ring around the rosy, you were probably told this was about the Black Death, the rosy rash, and the posies to mask the smell, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. It's one of the most repeated facts about the plague. It's almost certainly not true. Folklorists have traced the rhyme and found no evidence connecting it to the plague before the 20th century. It's a myth that got repeated so many times it became accepted as fact. History is full of those. And then, slowly, it began to ease. Not because anyone stopped it, not because of medicine or prayer or sacrifice. It eased because enough people had died. Because some survivors carried a genetic mutation, a variant in the gene called CCR5 that offered partial resistance. Natural selection, playing it out in real time across an entire continent. Those survivors rebuilt, and the world they rebuilt looked nothing like the one before. With so many dead, labor became scarce. Peasants could demand better wages, better conditions. The rigid feudal system that had defined European societies for centuries began to crack. The power of the church, which had failed to explain or stop the plague, began to erode. Artists began depicting death differently, more personality, more honestly. The Black Death didn't just kill people. It broke the medieval world open. And from that opening came Renaissance, the Reformation, the beginnings of modern Europe. Tragedy as the engine of progress. It's an uncomfortable idea, but the history keeps proving it's true. Between 75 and 200 million people gone in less than a decade. We will never know most of their names. We will never know their faces. We know only that they lived and that they died terrified. and that the world kept going without them. The Black Death is the deadliest event in human history, and most people couldn't even tell you when it started, how it spread, or why it actually ended. Now you know. If this is the kind of history nobody taught you, subscribe. New video every day.